الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So the last few gatherings we've been discussing some of the lessons that surround the birth of a child and the sacrifice, in particular last week, the sacrifice of the parents towards the child. And in last week's discussion, for those of you that were here, you'll recall that we talked about the fact that all of us are in a state of debt, and that debt essentially drives the decisions that people make. So when people are in a state of debt in the life of this world, then they know that they have to make payments, and they're worried about their payments, and it forces them to make decisions about jobs. It forces them to make decisions about where they're going to live and who they're going to be. And people who are in debt spiritually, they are also forced to make decisions, but they're forced to make decisions about how they use their time and where they apply their efforts because of the fact that they're in this spiritual debt. And so we talked about that in tremendous detail last week. And I'm not going to repeat that here. But from last week's discussion, there's one derivative point, and I thought that derivative point is very important to discuss. Now, maybe the theme, just to very briefly review, the theme from last week's discussion was that the Sharia recognizes the efforts that human beings make towards other human beings, and the Sharia places us in debt based on that. Okay, the Sharia recognizes the efforts that human beings make towards other human beings, and the Sharia places us in debt based on that. So, for example, our parents made tremendous sacrifices for us to grow into the adults that we've grown into. The mother went through the pregnancy, she went through carrying us, she went through delivering us, the parents went through the difficulty of raising us, the father went through the difficulty of sustaining the household, etc. And the Sharia appreciates that. The Sharia doesn't negate that. The Sharia appreciates that, and the Sharia appreciates it to such an extent that it makes the parents third in line after Allah, the Messenger, and then the parents. And in fact, if you wanted to review that ranking is essentially a ranking of debt. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is first and foremost because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that has placed us all into debt. We didn't exist, Allah created us. There was no world around us, Allah created the world around us. We needed to be formed, Allah made us out of a drop of fluid. So that placed us in tremendous debt. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he guided us to this Deen. That places us in tremendous debt. All the sacrifices that he made for this Deen to be established placed us in debt. And then the parents, obviously, they bring us into this circumstance, and they help us to exist within this circumstance, within the world that Allah created, and within the Deen that Rasulullah ﷺ bestowed upon us. So all of these are basically a derivative of the debt that we're in. Now, there's actually a corollary point to this that's very important. And if you get this, it'll take you very far in life. There's a corollary point to this, and if you get this, it will take you very far in life. And what's that? That is that not only does the Sharia appreciate the efforts that other human beings make human beings make towards other human beings, and then acknowledge it and make it part of the responsibility of a person, but the people of the Sharia appreciate when you have assisted them and you create a debt towards them. They appreciate it as well. For example, the example that I gave last week, and it's a very important example, is the fact that the service of the Deen by Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Now you know that when the Deen, the establishment of the Deen could not have occurred except that there were a group of people around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that helped in establishing the Deen, and they were the Sahaba. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very grateful to the efforts of the Sahaba. Now they made effort, right, and they basically created a circumstance of debt where they helped Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam establish his goal. And based on that, Rasulullah ﷺ appreciated it, and based on that, he made certain decisions. So this is a very important point to recognize. The famous statement of Rasulullah ﷺ where he says that, I have repaid the debt of all of you, of each of you. He's speaking to the companions. I have repaid the debt of each of you, except the debt of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Allah will repay his debt on the day of judgment. All right? That statement, it takes you very far because it highlights two principles. Number one, it highlights that Rasulullah ﷺ was appreciative of the fact that the Sahaba worked towards the Deen. He recognized it, he was cognizant of it, and he was accounting it in the back of his mind. Because he wouldn't have stood up and made the statement that I have repaid the debt of each of you unless he recognized that there was a debt and recognized that he repaid it. So the first half of the statement, although everybody jumps to the second half of the statement, the first half of the statement is very important because it means that Rasulullah ﷺ was tabulating the sacrifices of the companions and making sure that he gave them back in return for their sacrifice. And then the second half of the statement highlights then from that principle, highlights how much Abu Bakr radiallahu anh gave, in that Rasulullah ﷺ said, I repaid the debt of everyone except the debt of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Allah will repay it on the day of judgment. Yani, he made so much sacrifice that it was not repayable. Okay? So, what this is highlighting is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam appreciated the sacrifices of the companions. He was cognizant of the sacrifices of the companions, and he made an effort to repay the sacrifices of the companions. Another example, there was a companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was one of the personal servants of Rasulullah. Everybody knows that Hazrat Anas radiallahu anh was a servant or assistant of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was another companion that also had that very, very high status, and his name was Rabi'a radiallahu anh. Now, Rabi'a was so servicing, such an assistant to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that listen what happened on one occasion. One occasion he was helping Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the whole day. He was, serving him, assisting him, helping him in the things that he was doing, because in the end Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was serving the Deen. And he ended up that day serving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam so much that he was with him all the way until the night. Now, when it came time at the night, he then took the Prophet ﷺ to his home. Yani he was just serving him and taking him to the home. When he got to the home, he dropped off the Prophet ﷺ, and then he started thinking in his mind. He said, and he's saying himself, "Oh Rabi'a, what if the messenger needs your assistance in the middle of the night? Then what will happen?" So he made the decision on that night to sleep at the doorstep of Rasulullah ﷺ, so that if some need arose, some possibility of a need, not a definite need, not that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Hey, I need you at this time." Just if the possibility arose that if I can serve the Prophet ﷺ, I want a chance to serve Rasulullah ﷺ. Now, this person served Rasulullah ﷺ so much that in the end, the Prophet ﷺ could not repay. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, he was cognizant of the debt that people created, correct? And he always wanted to repay a debt. So he got to the point where the service was so much that it got, in a way, quote unquote, out of proportion to what Rasulullah ﷺ would have potentially been able to repay. So one day, the Prophet ﷺ, based on service after service after service, the Prophet ﷺ said to him that, okay, he said one day, ask me what you want. Ask me anything. So Rabi'a, he started thinking, what should I ask? And eventually he came to Rasulullah ﷺ, and he started thinking first. He says himself that I started thinking I can ask for anything. I can ask for a house. I can ask for a business. Now he didn't have much wealth. He didn't have a house. He didn't have a business. In fact, at one point he wasn't even married. He said, I could have asked for so many things. But I started thinking. And I said, Rabi'a, you get a chance to ask for anything, so ask for something special. So he said that Rasulullah, so then he went to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, you said I can ask for anything, so I would like to ask for your company in Jannah. Such an ajib request. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said that, do you want anything else? Are you sure? You can have anything. I'm asking you to, ask. So he said, no, this is what I want. So the Prophet ﷺ said that, then help me by increasing your sujood. Now that famous hadith, then help me by increasing your sujood. Then from that the ulama, they gather that increase your prayers so that this will help me to get you such a high reward on the Day of Judgment. But in the end, you can actually take a step back. Now most people look at this hadith and they interpret this hadith and they say, see, the person increases their sujood, and by increasing their sujood, they get an opportunity to be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is a valid interpretation. But you can look at the hadith another way. You could say that this individual created so much debt with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, spiritual debt, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's nature was to repay that debt, that in the end it got pushed to such an extreme that the only repayment that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had was to give him a dua to be in Jannah with him. Another example, the mother of Anas radiallahu anh, when Anas was 10 years old, she brought Anas to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she said, this is your little servant. Do whatever you please. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that time, he was so impressed by the debt created, by the love, the spiritual debt created, that he made a dua for Hazrat Anas. He said, oh Allah, increase him in his wealth, increase him in his offspring, increase him in his age, and forgive his mistakes. Alright? So, Hazrat Anas radiallahu anh, he used to recognize this dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He used to say that I saw this dua come true in my life. He says, number one, that his gardens used to give double the fruit that the other people's gardens used to give. Now there was a dua to increase his wealth, right? And he lived among the longest lives of the companions. In fact, it comes that he used to say, he was living 90 years, he used to say, I used to wonder, when am I going to die? Am I just going to keep living because the Prophet ﷺ made such a dua and I'm living and everybody's passing away and I'm 90 years, 100 years old. He was one of the very last companions to die. And similarly, he made a dua, the Prophet ﷺ made a dua for his offspring. He saw up to 100 of his grandchildren, up to 100 of his offspring, children and grandchildren. And then he used to weep and he used to say, and I hope that the fourth dua will also be accepted. I'll also see the result of the fourth dua. But in the end, what was it? It was that there was a debt, a type of spiritual debt created. And when that spiritual debt was created, the Prophet ﷺ did recognize the efforts of human beings. And when he recognized those efforts, he rewarded them accordingly. Another example, very famous example, and we've all heard about it before, one of the very last battles in the life of Rasulullah ﷺ was the battle at Hunain. And in the battle of Hunain, they conquered and they had tremendous spoils. A tremendous amount of spoils were obtained by the Muslims. Now, the Prophet ﷺ wanted to strengthen the hearts of the new Muslims, because Mecca had just been conquered, strengthen the hearts of the new Muslims by giving them the spoils. So the Prophet ﷺ took the camels and the cattle and the spoils, and he gave it to the people of Mecca. Now, in one area, when the spoils were being distributed, in one area was the area of the Ansar. And the Ansar, they were sitting there and they were watching that all these spoils were going to the people of Mecca. And they started thinking that, it naturally arose in the minds of some of them that we were the ones that supported the Deen. When there was no support for the Deen, we supported the Deen. These people were fighting us for the whole time. And now all of a sudden there's a battle and Rasulullah ﷺ is giving all these spoils to them. Now, whether that notion came up in their mind or whether it came up in the mind of a few, Rasulullah ﷺ was appreciative of it. And he felt it. He felt it because he was part of them. So he, after having distributed the spoils, he went to the base camp of the Ansar. He went to the base camp of the Ansar. And he said that, he asked them, that is there any complaint? And they said, no, there's no complaint. What complaint could we have? We're happy that we have the Deen. And he said that, I could say to you, he made this statement, he said, I could say to you that you were misguided and I guided you. And you were fighting with each other and I unified you. And you were no place and I raised you up. And then he was quiet, and then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Could I not say that to you?" And then the Ansar, they said, "Of course, labbaik, you could say any of these things to us. We're happy for whatever you've given us." Then the Prophet ﷺ, he's so fair. He says, "But you could have said back to me. You could have said, your people called you a liar, but we found you truthful. And your people threw you out, and we gave you a home. And your people fought you, and we stood and defended you. You could say these things to me." And then the Prophet ﷺ said a very, very deep statement, which is resonates in the ears of history. And what did he say? He said that, "Does it not suffice you that the people go home with camel and cattle, and you go home with the messenger of Allah?" SubhanAllah, such a deep statement. Does it not suffice you that the people go home with camel and cattle, and that you go home with the messenger of Allah? And when they heard that statement, the Ansar began to weep. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "If I was not from among the Muhajirin, I would have been from among the Ansar." And what was their gift? Their gift was that Rasulullah ﷺ maintained himself in Medina Sharif. He passed away in Medina Sharif. He was buried in Medina Sharif, and a piece of Jannah, Medina became a piece of Jannah. A strip of Jannah is present in Medina. Now, Rasulullah ﷺ could have returned home to Mecca. Mecca Sharif was so beloved to Rasulullah ﷺ. It was the home of so many of the prior prophets. But Rasulullah ﷺ appreciated the debt that the Ansar had created in the Deen, and based on that debt, he returned back with them. And this is the way that the Sharia is built. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was so appreciative of the sacrifices and the debt of the Ansar, so appreciative that He created a strip of Jannah. The land that they stood on, He made a piece of Jannah. It's the only piece of Jannah on the whole earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, they're very cognizant of the sacrifices that people make. And they never waste the deed of the believer. They never waste the deed of the believer. Now, why am I going into this whole discussion? To tell you one point. And if you take this point, there's very few things that I can tell you that you can live on. But I can tell you that if you take this one point, you can live on it. And that is that if you want to preserve yourself, and you want to benefit yourself, and you want to benefit your family, then one of the ways to do so is to create debt with the people of the Deen. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, let's say that there are scholars. There's so many scholars of the Deen in Chicago, correct? And each of them, mashallah, is so talented, and it's like there's a plethora here. It's almost as if they all ended up in one place, and it doesn't last like that. These are periods of time, and the waves of time, they move people here and there. It's just one point in time that we happen to see this opportunity. But we should not be foolish about this opportunity. We should not try to take from them. We should try to give to them. And we should try to create a circumstance of debt with them so that their hearts become attached to ours. And if we do that, then their attention will be towards us. Now, one of the greatest blessings that a person can have is the attention of the righteous and a relationship with the righteous. If you can have a relationship with your scholars, you can have a relationship with the people of Deen, you can have a relationship with the Mashaykh, that becomes so valuable in your life that it replaces anything else that you have. People can say to me, if people ask me, what's the most valuable thing that you have? I don't say it's my car or my house or my bank account or my education or my job. I say, one of the things that's so valuable to me is my connection with my Shaykh. So valuable to me. I'm so dependent on it, and it keeps me perpetuated in this Deen. The connection with my teachers, the connection with Shaykh Zulfikar, etc. And all of that is based on what? It's based on it's based on the attention of the scholars and our teachers towards us. So we should not be among those people that seek to be served. Most people show up in front of a scholar and they want to know, what can you do for me? What can you give me? What can you do for me? How can you benefit me? It should be the other way around. We should seek to serve. And believe me, that makes a much tighter relationship with a scholar than you going and just writing the questions down and asking for answers all the time. You should see, okay, what are the responsibilities of this individual? And how can I assist them in serving the Deen? Because when we assist in serving the Deen, then we create a debt. And when we create a debt, Allah is cognizant of that debt. And the scholars, they recognize this principle. And they're cognizant of that debt as well. So when we want a relationship with teachers, that's the way we do it. The relationship with a teacher doesn't develop by you going and sucking everything you can out of their brain. That's not a relationship. That's not the way that's not that special connection between a student and a teacher. The special connection between a student and a teacher arises when the student learns that they need to assist the teacher in what they're doing. Now, part of that is by learning what the teacher teaches and then perpetuating it. And that may be the main goal. It depends on the circumstance. But we should recognize that this is the way by which we attract the attention of our scholars. Now, it's very interesting. I'll just tell you a story that, just an example. Shaykh Zulfikar, my teacher, he's so busy. So busy. How many hundreds of thousands of people, are trying to get in touch with him, are trying to ask his advice, are trying to spend time with him. I can tell you that when he used to come, when I was studying in Jamia Faridiyya in the madrasa, he used to come into the madrasa, everybody wanted his time. Now there's 1,000 students there and there's, 100 teachers. And the moment he would walk in, everybody would want his time, and people would come to me weeks before and they would say, Shaykh Zulfikar is coming, you're his student, you know him. Can you tell him I need 5 minutes? Can you tell him I need 5 minutes? Even the principal would say this to me. When Shaykh Zulfikar comes, tell him that I also need 5 minutes. The principal of the whole school. So many people wanted his attention. And the moment he would be done speaking, all the students would be following, just trying to shake his hand, and a limited number of people could shake his hand. And I vividly remember the students saying, we can't even get near him. How can we develop a relationship with him? We can't even come anywhere close to him. It's a discussion, can we even shake his hand? It doesn't even happen. He has these big gatherings and there's 40,000 people now that come to his annual gathering. They can't even shake his hand. If they shake his hand, they walk away happy. So that's the circumstance. And in the back of my mind, one of the things that I've sort of thought is that it's very hard in this day and age to develop a fresh relationship with him, meaning at the level of Shaykh Zulfikar. And for the most part, he's created so many representatives of him, people who have studied under him and learned under him, that he, for the most part, will tell them to go to the nearest and closest representative. So if somebody happens to live on the, East Coast, he might send them to one particular representative. If somebody happens to live in France, he'll send them to another particular representative, because that's the only way that he can humanly deal with all of these people. It's the only way to solve the people's issue, and while recognizing that he's one person. So, in the back of my mind, I felt that, his situation in this world, has become such that it's basically impossible for anybody to establish a new relationship. It's possible, the new people really are going to be now going to the people who he's trained and are representing him. So, recently, let's say in the last 5 years, one of the people who was present in America, he happened to get a job in Riyadh, and then, I can't remember where he started, Dubai, and then eventually in Riyadh. And he moved over there, and when he moved over there, he started interacting with Shaykh Zulfikar. Now, the first time he just gave salam, and, I introduced him, and he started interacting with him. But eventually, he started seeing an opportunity. He saw that, Shaykh Zulfikar is so busy, somebody needs to manage the whole global schedule. And there's nobody managing the whole global schedule. So this person started saying that, let's see if I can get an opportunity. He didn't go there saying, what can you do for me? He said, I can do this for you. I'll manage this. I'll set this up. I'll do this. And he started taking on responsibility after responsibility after responsibility. And it became such that now Shaykh Zulfikar does not even take a phone call, like a big phone call, without going through him whenever he's around. You want to talk to Shaykh Zulfikar, you have to contact him, and then he puts you in touch with Shaykh Zulfikar. And I'm still amazed that at such a late stage, he was able to establish such a relationship, but that relationship in the end was what? It was through service. He's creating a debt, and Shaykh Zulfikar appreciates that debt, because what does he have to give? He doesn't have money to give you. He doesn't have a house to give you. He has to give you himself. That's the only way these people repay the debt. The mashayikh and the ulama, they're not going to give you money. They're not going to give you any kind of, awards and gifts. In the end, what do they have? They have themselves. So they give you themselves, and they make you part of their family. They make you part of them. And I will tell you that this brother is basically a child, is a son of Shaykh Zulfikar. His children are like Shaykh Zulfikar's grandchildren. He treats them the exact same way. And when he goes to Mecca Sharif, he lives in his house. He stays in his home. So it's again, the general premise is what? The general premise is that we should recognize that the Sharia recognizes when we serve others, and that the Deen recognizes it, and that the people of the Deen recognize it. And whenever we put ourselves in circumstances of use, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never waste it. Now, some people say, how can I make myself consistent in the masjid? There's a lot of ways to make yourself consistent in the masjid, but one way, be the first one and prepare the masjid for others. I will tell you that if it's a heavy snow day and you come here and just shovel the walkway for people to come in and put a little bit of salt on the ground, then you've created a little bit of debt, right, to the masjid, and the masjid will repay you. The masjid also has some animation to it. Yani, it can make dua for a person, right? This ground can make dua for a person. So this masjid will also then make dua for you. It's interesting, there's a statement of Rasulullah ﷺ that the person who calls the adhan for so many years, that they will be raised with long necks on the Day of Judgment. And what does that statement mean? That statement means that the person who calls others to the masjid is so appreciative of that, and the Sharia is so appreciative of that the Sharia will reward them accordingly. So again, it's creating a circumstance of debt. And I can tell you that I've in my life seen a few cases where people were calling the adhan in the masjid, and over time I saw them change, and the Sharia and the Sunnah became more and more embedded within them. Although in the beginning they were maybe not necessarily practicing all of the Sharia and aiming towards all of the Sunnah. I've seen it more than one occasion that the muadhin, there's a special change that occurs within the muadhin. So again, we should be people that don't seek to take, but actually seek to give something back. And when we do so, we'll be rewarded. Now, if we were among the Ansar, then we would have been rewarded with the blessed opportunity to take Rasulullah ﷺ back to our city. But we have to do what we can, and it's our sacrifice that then attracts the barakat that occur here. So we should be very cognizant of that. And one very important, again, principle that I can say that you can take home and you can write in gold, you and your family should find the people of the Deen, and you, as a family, you should assist those people in their effort towards the Deen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be recognizing of it, the mashayikh will be recognizing of it, and you'll create a very tight relationship. And that's a very special gift in this day and age. It's a very special gift in this day and age. I mean, just a simple example, Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that, I don't remember a day that Rasulullah ﷺ didn't come to our home twice in a day. It's in the Bukhari. She doesn't remember a day in which Rasulullah ﷺ didn't come to their home twice in a day. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine what type of relationship Rasulullah ﷺ had with the family of Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anh? I mean, if the Rasulullah ﷺ were to come to somebody's home once in their life, they would have been the most blessed person. And we're talking about twice in a day. Twice in a day. That's what type of sacrifice that family made. And when it came to the hijrah, it was basically Hazrat Abu Bakr's whole family. Nobody else knew what was going on. But that family was the family that prepared the camels, brought the food on during the journey, etc., etc. The whole family became, that was the family that established that whole trip. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was the one that actually had got the opportunity to travel with the Prophet ﷺ. And you know what the ulama say? They say that the Prophet ﷺ took two trips in his life, two famous trips in his life. One famous trip from the ground to the heaven. And on that trip, he had one companion, Angel Jibreel. And one famous trip from Mecca to Medina. And on that trip, he had one companion, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. And that he had the best companion in each particular trip. Amazing. The trip to the heavens, they had the best angel, and the trip on the ground had the best companion. So, this is a very important principle in our deen. We should seek to create that. Serve human beings as much as possible, it creates debt. Serve parents as much as possible, it creates debt. Serve the masjid as much as possible, it creates debt. The masjid makes dua for you. Serve the servants of the deen as much as possible, it creates debt, it creates a relationship. They'll watch over you, they watch over your children, they tell you advice that perhaps nobody else would tell you. But anyway, these are the secrets of the deen, for the people who are seeking the secrets of the deen. وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين